This podcast was recorded on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation.
Hello and welcome to The Real Story with Joe Hildebrand. I'm Joe Hildebrand and I am totally real. I'm so for real. You just would not know how real it is. And this week we've got an absolutely huge episode for you. A very special guest I'll talk to very shortly. And we're going to get to the bottom of what actually went wrong with the Democrats' campaign to just hold the thing they were given. They were already in the White House. Kamala Harris gets given the presidency on a plate and yet somehow manages to drop that plate and spill everything on it at her feet. And now Donald Trump, of course, has won in a landslide. And I know that you can't get enough of the Donald. Love him or hate him, we cannot get enough of him. So I'm going to tell you what went wrong over there and why it's exactly like something that just went wrong over here. And this is what it's going to mean for the Democrats, and this is what it is going to mean for the Australian Labor Party right here in Australia. Anthony Albanese's prime ministership depends on this. Make no mistake, and I'll tell you exactly why very shortly. Plus, what's going on with our man Albo? Our man Albo in the ambassadorial residence in Washington, D.C. A few nasty little tweets, a few nasty little comments. I was shocked, personally. I did not know that Kevin Rudd had a mean streak. Did you? No? Seemed like a nice guy to me. We were besties. Did you know that? I used to kind of be his right-hand man, his kind of PR guy, Robin to his Batman. But I'll tell you everything about why Kevin Rudd kind of made those mean comments in the first place. But more importantly, is he going to last as Australia's ambassador to the United States? This is the most important diplomatic role in the country. And it's no surprise that it goes to a former prime minister. You know that when you go from prime minister, the next job up is US ambassador. That's a pretty important job. But he could get recalled because of these mean comments he's made about Donald Trump in the first place, calling him the most dangerous president in history and a village idiot. More and more keep coming to the surface. But I do not think he will be recalled, and I'll tell you why just after this. Plus, the character in a children's book that's getting everyone outraged. So much so that the author, a famous celebrity chef, has had to apologise. So what is the outrage actually all about? Has he done anything wrong? And what is it that we actually should be outraged about that nobody who's outraged even knows is happening? We'll get to that with our very special guest. I guarantee you will love her. So first up this week, I'm going to take you through a scenario, and it might sound very familiar to you. First, you've got a worthy cause, a cause that everyone you know thinks is an absolute no-brainer, something that should happen. It's the decent thing to happen. It's the right thing to happen. It's a foregone conclusion, if you will, for anyone who's smart and compassionate in this here crazy world. Then you've got a huge political advantage. You've got hundreds of millions of dollars being thrown at it. You've got basically all the kind of cultural and community leaders that matter on board. You've got all the sort of corporate leaders on board. They're throwing money at it too. They're throwing their support behind it. Somehow you still manage to fuck it up. Somehow you get all that advantage. You're ahead in the polls. You got the hundreds of millions of dollars. You got all the top high-profile people on your side. You got celebrity endorsements coming out the wazoo. But you still manage to screw the pooch. How does this happen? Well, you might think I'm talking about the 2024 Democratic election campaign for the US presidency and also the Senate and also the Congress and also the popular vote and most of the gubernatorial votes that they also lost. But it also perfectly describes the referendum we had in 2023 in Australia, the Voice referendum. And this was something that was just absolutely heartbreaking to watch. It was devastating to watch. I was, of course, on the side of the Voice. I supported it. I was outspoken in favour of it. And yet at the same time, I could just see the people in charge of the campaign just slowly but surely, inevitably, as though it was almost pre-programmed, just screwing it up, just grinding it into the ground. And how did this happen? Well, there are a number of factors, and they were both completely analogous to what was happening in the US. So firstly, you get this worthy cause, right? You get this cause that you think and everyone you know at all the dinner parties you go to is an absolute no-brainer. It's almost a consensus. You know, you have an Indigenous voice to Parliament and, you know, of course, everyone's going to support that. How could you? You know, we've been here for, 2.5 centuries. Things haven't gone too well for the First Nations people. We tried to sort of fix it. We tried to fix the problems we helped create. Nothing was working. Why don't we ask them? Why don't we ask them what's going to work? And if they come up with a solution, we don't have to do it. We don't have to do anything. We just have to listen to it. If we think it sounds all right, we can do it. If it works, great. If it doesn't, well, we can try something else, or they can come up with another solution. Seemed pretty simple to me. Non-binding, get out of jail free. But no, because instead of sitting down and thinking, well, maybe there's some other people out there who don't think this is a good idea, I just went, nah, we're just going to do it. So just as the Democrats thought, well, if you vote for Donald Trump, no one's actually really voting for Donald Trump, are they? No one actually really likes this guy. Everyone I hang out with, I watch MSNBC and CNN. No one likes Donald Trump, except those crazy Fox News people. And it was a bit the same with The Voice. Well, everyone's in favour of The Voice, aren't they? I mean, no one could oppose The Voice. The Libs will have to back it, otherwise everyone will hate them. No one's opposed to The Voice. It's a fantastic. Everyone I speak to likes The Voice, except, of course, those crazy Sky News After Dark people. But no one listens to them, do they? Justina Price, no one's going to listen to her. She's... And so the first mistake that they make, and again, keep in mind, these are all fatal mistakes. These are all probably fatal mistakes on their own. Combined, they are a sort of extinction level event. But so they write off anyone who might disagree as being just a nutter, just out there. You know, if Peter Dutton does this, he'll sign his own death warrant. And I was one of those people who at first thought maybe that was the case. Again, it's very easy to get swept up in these things. I thought, well, Peter Dutton does this. There's no way he's getting any of those teal seats back. And, you know, the Labor government was riding high in the polls at the time. Thought, that's it. Maybe he has just actually written himself out of the race. But of course, that wasn't the case. As Peter Dutton and especially as Warren Mundine and Jacinta Price built up more and more momentum, their communication skills were punchier. For many cases, these were the first sort of community leaders that a lot of people had seen, the first Indigenous community spokespeople that a lot of people had seen. They thought, wow, these guys are really articulate, they're charismatic, they're punchy in their lines, and they're saying the Voice is a terrible idea. So the first thing they did was just wrote off their opposition, saying anyone who opposes this, you know, has automatically written themselves out of the game. But of course, that doesn't happen. These people start to get louder and louder. And so then what do? Then you just start abusing them. So then instead of actually saying, and again, this is exactly what happened in both cases, did the Democrats actually think, all right, what is actually forcing people or making people vote for Donald Trump? What is it they want? What's going wrong in their lives? What is it that they don't like? It's pretty obvious now what they don't like. They don't like people from outside America coming in and taking their jobs. And you know who doesn't like it the most? The most vulnerable, low-skilled, low-paid workers. That's why so many Hispanics turned on Kamala Harris when she thought she had them in the bag on the basis of their skin color. That's what you get for being what the French call raciste. Anyway, so the first thing they did is not actually listen to the people and listen to the people who were opposing them. Just assumed that they were all just a write-off. But then when those people did start to say, hang on a minute, yeah, we're not too sure about that. Firstly, it was the people within the actual Voice campaign, the moderate people within the Voice campaign said, you know what, if we just keep adding more and more stuff into this, which is what they were doing, which is beyond the proposal that was already put forward and agreed upon, we're not going to win. We're moving away from consensus, not towards it. And we're going to drive people on the fence, moderate liberals who might have helped bring people over, we're going to drive them away. And these people were called bedwetters and bellyachers, said, oh, these are traitors to the cause. And so these people actually within the campaign were accused by those, or some of those at least, in charge of the campaign. I don't want to name, there's a lot of people I really love and admire, but were saying really stupid stuff. We're basically having a civil war before the campaign had ever really probably begun, against anyone who was trying to take a more moderate and conciliatory position. Say, hey, if we just compromise, maybe we can get Peter Dutton on board. Maybe we can get more conservatives on board. They said, nah, screw them. We're going for it. We'll carry it through. Look, we're on 60%. Everything's fine. And again, the same complacency that infected the Democrats infected this campaign for what could have been this incredible landmark reform. So that happened. But then you've got people out there in the community on the fence who don't know much about it, or being told that maybe the Voice is a racially divisive program or whatever, or maybe it's not going to be in their interest, or maybe it's just a distraction from the cost of living crisis that everyone's going through. And so what do the campaigners do then? Do they say, hey, listen, we know this isn't the most important thing in the world for you right now. You're struggling to put food on the table, and this is an issue that you probably don't really care or that much about, not going to affect you. No, they say, this is the most important thing in the world, and we have to do it. And we have to do it because you're guilty and you're responsible for the colonialism of your forefathers and your forefathers and your forefathers' forefathers. And that's why you have to do it to right this historical wrong. This is incredible because now white Australia has a black history and we have to fix that now. Otherwise, we'll never be able to sleep at night. And this guy's going, what are you talking about? My parents came over from Lebanon. I'm not responsible for all this. I'm just trying to feed my family. And again, these people are not speaking the language of the people who ended up crueling their dreams, shattering their hopes and ambitions, destroying what they thought was the status quo. Exactly what happened in America. All these people were saying, hey, don't worry, it's Kamala Harris here. We've got joy. There's all these people living in trailer parks in middle America. You know, kids run off with a handful of fentanyl. They're saying, what joy? What joy are you talking about? I've got to go out tonight and work a second shift in a second job just to pay the rent. There's no joy here. Don't care what Oprah Winfrey says. But all this stuff that's really important to people on Instagram doesn't matter to people in the real world. So again, these campaigns just keep going and going and going, and they keep crushing themselves. And they become so obsessed with their own virtue, so obsessed with their own righteousness. And then they get a bit anxious that suddenly everyone's not on board after all, even though everyone they know is on board because they haven't been listening to or talking to anyone who's actually out there in the community and not already on board. And so then they start to get delusional. And then you say, all right, well, everyone who disagrees with me is a fascist or a racist. And where does this get you? It gets you exactly where we are, which is with Donald Trump in a clean sweep in the White House. The Republicans have control of both the House of Representatives and the Senate, and he's won the popular vote. So you can't even say that the Democrats won the will of the people, but because the Electoral College system is rigged, then Donald Trump got it. And of course, I forgot the most important part of any campaign when you're about to lose, just roll out as many celebrity endorsements as you can. Working people, I tell you what, hard-working people slugging their guts out just to put food on the table, they love it when celebrities tell them what to do. They really do. They love just being told what to do by millionaire celebrities who drive around in Hummers and Lamborghinis and live in giant mansions. The only thing they love more than that is being told they're racist or they're stupid by said celebrities. They just love it. They love being told that they're ignorant. The good news is that it appears both the Democrats and the Labor Party are learning their lesson. And Nate Silver, one of the very, very, very few pollsters who kind of picked the election pretty much about right. It went even more to Donald Trump than he was predicting. But, you know, he's come out and he said the Democrats are saying they are not going to touch any woke stuff anymore with a barge pole. This is the end of identity politics. No more judging people by the color of their skin and assuming they're going to act because they're from a certain ethnicity. Because guess what? That's racist. And no more being obsessed with these sort of ideological issues the left are obsessed with, which have no meaning whatsoever for ordinary people, the vast majority of people, and which make ordinary people think that the left or the elites don't actually take care of them. Because that's a big problem when the left is meant to be the party of the ordinary people, the movement that actually supports workers, and the workers themselves saying, we have no idea what you're talking about. And either we don't like it or it just means you don't know what we're going through. And that's the exact same thing that the Labor Party is doing here in Australia. They're not touching. The Voice is absolutely verboten. No one is even mentioning it. It is the former love that dare not speak its name, you know, the ex that won't stop calling but you don't pick up the phone. And they're just going, cost of living, cost of living, cost of living, cost of living, cost of living. Someone said, but how about that Voice campaign you did last year? Cost of living, cost of living, cost of living, cost of living. I can't hear you. But the voice, sorry, I can't hear you. Cost of living, cost of living, cost of living. So maybe finally the parties of the workers in the US and the parties of the workers in Australia will actually finally start representing the workers once more. And while we're speaking of the Labor Party, which is frankly all I ever do speak about, so thank God they're in government and it is actually relevant to people's lives, what are we going to do about our ambassador to the United States? As Lionel Shriver once famously said in a book of the same name, we need to talk about Kevin. Kevin Rudd is there. The main reason, because he's a super foreign policy nerd, of course, famously former foreign minister, foreign policy spokesman, and former Chinese diplomat himself. He's got a brilliant brain. Just ask him, he'll tell you. And he's obviously, if anything, overqualified for the position. He's been Prime Minister of Australia, not once but twice. I mean, that's got to be good for the CV, right? Didn't look so good when we were experiencing it here at home, but on paper, that looks fantastic, Got the double. So he's been sent over to the US. There was one other minor reason that Kevin Rudd was sent there to be Australia's top diplomat. And that's because he wouldn't shut up. He wouldn't stop tweeting Wouldn't stop banging on, wouldn't stop calling for a Murdoch Royal Commission, wouldn't stop having a go at all his former enemies, settling all his scores. And again, one of those people where it's everyone else's fault. It's not my fault. It was the entire Labor Party's fault. It's not my fault. It's the entire country's fault. No, it's not my fault. Oh, it's Rupert Murdoch's fault. It's everyone's fault except Kevin's. Very important to know. And so he said a few mean things about Donald Trump when he was free and easy and didn't realise he was about to be Australia's number one guy in Washington who would have to deal with America's number one guy in Washington, who is Donald Trump. And so he said he was the village idiot in the most recent revelation. He called him dangerous and destructive, all the usual stuff. And again, pretty much everybody has said this about Donald Trump at one point in their lives. I mean, Donald Trump's own vice president has said bad stuff about Donald Trump, and Donald seems to be okay with that. Other people, however, like, say, Nikki Haley or Mike Pompeo, they said some kind of not quite nice stuff about Donald Trump, and he's freezing them out. He's putting them in the freezer. But, by and large, Donald can be quite forgiving. There's a lot of people, though, who said, no, this is untenable. Kevin Rudd can't stay on as ambassador. Anthony Albanese's got to recall him, got to bring him back. This is terrible. I don't think Albo will, and I will tell you why. The reasons go back to that very febrile and highly charged moment where Kevin Rudd was the Prime Minister of Australia not once but twice. And in this scenario, Anthony Albanese was one of the very few high-profile senior supporters of Kevin Rudd who did not waver, who actually supported him through thick and thin, who supported Kevin Rudd in his doomed bid to hold on to the leadership in 2010 when Julia Gillard first rolled him, and supported him throughout the wilderness years. He did the honourable thing. He said to Julia Gillard, I supported Kevin Rudd. Here is my resignation. If you want it, I'm prepared to fall on my sword. I know the rules of politics. I know the rules of war. Julia Gillard, to her great credit, said, no, you're a senior minister. You're a great asset. We want you to stay on. But Albo remained loyal to Rudd throughout. He did not publicly criticise Julia Gillard, but he just sort of sat on Rudd's side of the ledger. And indeed, when Rudd eventually came back after a few abortive coups, some of which Rudd wasn't even involved in, believe it or not, he just sort of laid the landmines on the ground, and then if they went off, oh, well, so much the better. Oh, look, Simon Crean stepped on one. And when Rudd eventually did come back to the leadership, he made Anthony Albanese the Deputy Prime Minister, which is pretty sweet. Who doesn't love being Deputy Prime Minister? So these are people who are forged in blood. These are people who have been in the trenches together. They have tasted victory. They have tasted defeat. And if there's one thing you can say about Albo, he is very, very disturbingly, worryingly, concerningly, perhaps even self-destructively loyal. He's a good mate. He's a good guy. If he's on your side, he sticks by you. If you're on his side, if you look after him, he looks after you. And he does this often to his own detriment. He did it to Andrew Giles. Andrew Giles, probably the most hapless immigration minister we have ever had. I don't think that's necessarily an overstatement. Just didn't seem to really know what he was doing. Didn't really seem to sort of do anything. And then, of course, eventually he had to be shafted out of that portfolio, but not until the government had copped body blow after body blow. Like, we're talking a hail of slings and arrows of justice and injustice being hurled at them, and Albo stuck by him. Why? Because Albo's his mate. Albo sticks by his mate. So Albo's big problem is he's a nice guy. He's a good guy. And he's even a nice guy and a good guy to people like Kevin Rudd, who, notwithstanding his towering intellect, hate to tell you, isn't always that nice a guy. Sometimes Kevin Rudd can be a bit mean. That's kind of why he was booted from the Prime Ministership in the first place and didn't seem to learn his lesson. So I think Anthony Albanese is going to keep him there for that reason. Another reason, of course, is this weird thing in politics where you've got to sort of thread the needle. There's one rule. If there's something that's gone wrong, this is Richo's great rule. If there's something that's gone wrong, you own up to it immediately, you apologise for it immediately, and you act on it immediately and you fix it. And so you just jump on the grenade and you say, right, yes, that's terrible. Whoever's going to, pay for it is going to pay for it. So there you go. Walk you out the back, bullet in the back of the head. Terribly sorry, everybody. We've taken care of it. We've held whoever is responsible to account. It'll never happen again because we've fixed it. Nothing to see here. Thanks very much for your time. That's what Peter Beattie did very effectively in Queensland. He was the best premier, best politician at apologising. And every time he apologised, his stocks seemed to go up. There was a very famous apocryphal story of John F. Kennedy, the President of the United States, after the Bay of Pigs, when the CIA decided to invade Cuba, one of the biggest disasters in foreign and military policy in United States history. Absolutely disastrous. And JFK came out, so the story goes, said, yes, that was us. Terribly sorry to all the Cuban nationals we sent over there who got captured and are never coming back, even if they're still alive. Terribly sorry we had our fingerprints all over it. Yep, that was awful. Won't happen again. And his approval ratings went through the roof. And the legend has it he turned to his advisors and said, wow, you got to tell me to fuck up more often. And this is one school of thought. There is another school of thought, however, which is that if you've done something that isn't quite necessarily a complete and utter disaster, if you overreact to it and pretend that it is, or if you try to, I suppose, smash that walnut with a sledgehammer, then it could make it look worse than it actually is. So if everybody goes really, really quiet, if Kevin Rudd just quietly goes and deletes all those mean tweets, which he has done, believe it or not, no one's going to remember that, are they? No. Oh, and then there was that webinar where he called Trump the village idiot. Oh, can we call that Indian MP and see if he can delete the video? Oh, it's online? On the computer? What's the internet? Anyway, so he seems to think he can just sort of smooth it over and say, hey, there's nothing to see here. So if the ambassador isn't sacked or recalled, then by definition, it's not a sackable offence. And if it's not a sackable offence, then it can't be that bad. So Anthony Albanese is hoping that by not treating the matter as serious, then other people won't treat the matter as serious either. Will that work? I don't know. But if it doesn't, Kevin Rudd's going to have to learn his first sport after handball, and it's going to have to be golf. The good news is he only has to learn how to lose at it. Now, there are some so-called stories that just make my head hurt. I just read it and I go, what? Sorry, you're upset about what you're angry about? Hang on a minute. Maybe if I hold it up to the light, no, maybe if I read it back, no, maybe if I play Sergeant Pepper backwards and it makes sense. No, it doesn't. This is the outrage over, and bear with me here, this is the outrage over a children's book that Jaimie Oliver wrote that had a character in it who happened to be an Indigenous girl in foster care. And this was outrageous or upsetting because maybe it had something to do with the stolen generation, even though Jaimie Oliver didn't know anything about the stolen generation, or maybe he should have asked for permission before putting an Indigenous character in a children's book. And so he comes out here for something completely different, and then he has to apologise for having this character in a children's book because I don't know why. And the weird thing is, there's always just an exquisite irony in these things. The weird thing is that all this outrage was going on at the exact same time that there was a huge nationwide summit to try to get thousands of kids in foster care into permanent homes. Tens of thousands of kids all over the country in foster care into permanent homes. Massive summit. And did that get any coverage? No, we were all too busy talking about Jaimie Oliver's triggering children's book, which, quite frankly, I'd never heard of until there was a whole bunch of outrage about it. And my next guest is an absolute superstar in this area. She is a writer, she's an actor, and she joins me on the show right now. Zuffi Emerson, welcome to The Real Story. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much for having me.
It is an absolute pleasure. We've known each other for years. I love you. I love your work. You're a superstar. But despite that kind of pantheon of achievement that I've just outlined, the most important thing about you, I guess the most defining thing about you, is that you yourself were adopted. You came from Ethiopia to Australia for a new start. This is obviously what was considered your best chance at the best start in life, and by God, it's gone pretty well so far. Firstly, tell us a little bit about your life story and how you came to be here.
Yeah, so I was adopted from Ethiopia at the age of 5 months, and I actually found out the story of my parents getting to Ethiopia and how they got me here. So when they arrived in Addis Ababa, I had already been put up for adoption, and I was in an orphanage where I met them, and I was really sick. I had scabies, they suspected HIV, I had pneumonia, think I had chickenpox, a whole cocktail of things you don't want. And my parents took me to the Swedish hospital, to a private hospital from there, and they said, will you guys go home? And then we'll tell you if she makes it in the morning. And my parents said, I don't think so. So they took me out, back to the hotel room, ran down to the American pharmacy, grabbed all the resources that they needed to get me back on track or at least stabilise me. And one of the things they did within that was they got formula that would help me put on weight. And I was so underweight, they weren't going to let me come back into Australia because the rules were so rigid then, and the prospect of me coming back was looking pretty grim. And so it turned out they overfed me. They put me on the scales with a full nappy and I think maybe my mum's hand. And they got me over the line and brought me home. So they literally did save my life.
I love that.
Yeah.
So how was it that your birth parents came to decide that the best path for you was adoption and to come over to Australia?
The trajectory was probably pretty grim, and that's something I don't have the answer to. But given the circumstances I was found in and the way that my parents did have to care for me in that very first moments of meeting me, there was no real alternative.
That's right. And obviously Ethiopia is a country that faces enormous poverty and disadvantage as well. And you were, I suppose, the human embodiment of that. Now, I know you can't see in a podcast, but we'll put the picture up and hopefully people can see the video. But now you are anything but that's poor sickly infant that was sort of spirited away from Ethiopia. What was your reaction when you saw all the fuss and the hoo-ha about this children's book? This is an area where you have been advocating for years. You've been trying to get attention for years on the huge numbers of kids who are in foster care who we need to find permanent homes for. You know, you don't get half the traction that this hysteria over a kid's book has gotten. But anyway, let me shut up. What was your reaction?
I just wished that the outrage also extended to the children that are living in out-of-home care. I wish that we were equally as furious that this problem even exists. And while I'm an ambassador, Adopt Change does fantastic work as an organisation to try and get better outcomes for children in out-of-home care. And as you said before, the numbers are so bad at the moment. They're stadium proportions of children that really need permanent homes and home-based care. And some find that in kinship care, some find that in long-term solutions, but home-based care and stability and permanency is what we're seeing changing the trajectory of these kids like me that otherwise would have a pretty grim outcome.
And the organisation you mentioned, Adopt Change, this is the leading organisation in this area. A lot of people think adoption, they think of Angelina Jolie, you know, assembling a family from all corners of the globe. That is not the primary mission of Adopt Change. In fact, the focus of this organisation is all about getting kids who are in foster care that can be incredibly sporadic, that has no sense of sort of permanence, as you say, where kids can be taken from loving foster carers, foster parents, and put back with their birth families with disastrous results. Kids in out-of-home care where they're not even in foster care and group homes and things like that. How big is this problem? How many kids are there in out-of-home care in Australia or New South Wales?
We've got, so Adopt Change, definitely that is the work that they do, but they really are pushing to see a home for every child and home-based care, whatever that looks like. Yep. And for every child, that's so different. We're seeing 45,273, to be precise, children who are in out-of-home care at the moment. And that 10% of that, those numbers, those children are actually in motels and caravans.
Yes, that's right. So in the sense of that number, the kids who are actually in foster care, despite all that insecurity and impermanence, they're the lucky ones in that cohort. There are others who are being put up, like you say, in caravans, in motel rooms, you know, with a docks worker sleeping on the floor to keep them company because they can't find anywhere else, in group homes that can often be very fluid, can be, you know, dangerous at times even because these kids come from really troubled backgrounds. That surely should be the object of our outrage as a nation rather than some fleeting character in a kid's book.
Yeah, I mean, we should definitely be focusing. And I just want to be clear that children are in a myriad of different situations at the moment, and it definitely suits them. Those different situations look different for everyone. But for the most part, a home-based care is the way to go. It is not right to have kids in motels and caravans being essentially unsupervised or having the bare minimum.
So the first step is we need to make sure that all those kids who aren't even in a home are in a home with foster parents, with foster carers,
whatever that
possible.
looks like. Yeah.
And then the other big thing that Adopt, Change and You work for is to get a sort of pathway for kids who are in foster care to be adopted, often by ideally, and this is what all parties often want, adopted by the foster parents they already have, who just want to say, we love you so much, we want to take care of you, we just want to be your parents. And the kids often want that, and the foster parents want that, and yet there are all these kind of regulatory hurdles. There's all this ridiculous red tape in the way.
Yeah, there's a lot of red tape, but Adopt Change isn't pushing for adoption necessarily, but they are looking for the better outcome for these children, whatever that may be.
That's right. Yep.
So we're looking for the permanency of these children. While I can't speak on behalf of the organisation itself, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, that's right. Anyone can see that.
It's a no-brainer for sure that every child should be able to have access to a home, whatever that looks like. And in tandem with that, which is what Adopt Change is pushing for, is pre- and post-trauma support. And to make sure those children, whatever their circumstance, because it is so individual, adoption, I would first say, isn't what every child needs at all. And in some cases, it's far from what they need. So it's really an individualized process. And when we're looking at, the sector, government, different grassroots organisations, that Spider-Man photo where everyone's very nerdy, but everyone's pointing like that.
Oh, yeah.
That's what it feels like a lot of adults are doing. So the focus and what Adopt Change is actually pushing for is, rather than providing the answers to whatever an outcome is as a general blanket, they are definitely looking for the focus to be back on the kids and what a kid really needs.
And in almost every circumstances, that is whatever we call it, whether it's adoption or foster care or whatever, but it is that permanency and that sense of security. And that is so critical for a child, isn't it? To know that this is my home, these are my parents or my guardians, these are people who look after me, this is the school I go to. Because you talk about all that, and we've worked on this for years as well and talked about these sorts of things that we're really just discovering now. But the traumas and the anxieties that kids go through if they think, all this could be taken away from me, or I could be taken away from all this at any moment. Just providing that sense of security is probably the most important thing you can do for a child's life, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you've got the neurological impact. You've also got just that real grounded sense of stability when you do know where you belong and you're not spending every night thinking, where am I going to sleep? Who's going to be there? What am I going to eat? And better than that is when you do have that stability and permanency, and you do have that consistency, and adults are acting in your best interest, truly,
yes,
whatever
right,
that may look
right.
like. It is, and you are supported. Children that go through trauma need to be supported and have the adequate supports, and that's what Adopt Change is really pushing for. So when we've got that in place, it is a no-brainer that a child can thrive.
So we've got 45,000 kids in Australia in out-of-home care. 45,000. That's enough to fill the SCG. Let's just park that for a moment. Over the same period, how many adoptions were there in Australia?
There were 201 adoptions in 2023. So adoption is at an all-time low, which means kids like me are totally missing out on the opportunity to thrive. And to see that and to see the life that me and my brothers had is totally heartbreaking. It's the first time it's been that low, and we've closed all our programs. So that is just, really devastating.
That is just insane. That is insane. And these adoptions, that's just not 200 of those 45,000. That's 200 in total, including adoptions from overseas and everything. 200 in total, while 45,000 kids.
Yeah.
In out-of-home care.
Including inter-country. So the program me and my brothers were adopted through is totally shut down, and there's been a big global push to keep people in their birth countries. But of course, there's a lot of kids that were like me, still waiting for a home. So, it's something that's really got to change.
That is staggering. Well, we have to change it. Again, it is it is so simple. Just having a loving home, a stable home, a permanent home, and we have to make sure that governments are doing everything they can to remove any obstacles to that, instead of sort of throwing them up. And often these are with best intentions. Oh, we have to make sure that, this person's Mother Teresa, or we have to make sure that, this person, like a lot of the time, the governments are doing these things out of a kind of, to minimize all this risk, while at the same time, this child is languishing in this limbo and suffering all these traumas, while the government sort of thinks that it's helping it. It's one of those ironies as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's never made sense to me, and I can't specifically actually speak to that and the government's role in this, but I can talk to my experience that it's just never made sense. Why did we get to live through that process? Because people thought about our outcome and our trajectory. The trajectory for these other children and children that are caught in limbo is so grim. And we're looking at things like homelessness, and school participation, down to their own personal neurological impact. So given the choice, what are we going to give these kids? Exactly
right. And again, I'm no scientist, but we have absolute proof of how these things can turn out right in front of me, which is you. You're an absolute superstar. And what are you up to now? Tell me something. You've got all these different projects on the go. You're a writer. You're an actor. We probably can't say, but you're in talks with a massive studio organisation that I won't say anything about to jinx it. But you're pretty hot right now.
Thank you. I am. I'm a huge part of what I love doing is telling stories. I think it's because I was born with a pretty good one, I think. So I've always loved telling stories and finding out other people's stories because they were always so different from mine. Now that I get to do that and be in the land of documentary and film, it's pretty exciting.
Well, your story is a phenomenal story, and thank you so much for joining us on The Real Story.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks for getting to The Real Story.
And that is all we have time for this week before I fully start breaking down in tears. I just love Sophie. She does incredible work, and every time I see her, I'm just, honestly, it melts me. If you like what you've heard this week or any other week, and of course you're going to like it, you're not made of stone, give us a review, leave us a 5-star rating. There is no other rating for what you just heard. You can drop us a line at therealstory@novapodcast.com.au. You can follow me on Instagram at Joe_Hildebrand and slide into my DMs, get plenty of feedback that way. Any questions you want answered, any feedback you got about the show, any topics you'd like us to discuss, by all means do it. I'm just pulling myself together here. And of course, you can read me in all the various mastheads, News Corp mastheads around the country every Monday and Saturday. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next week.